Morning guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit longer than what I normally do because the topic that I have today is going to be, it's an incredibly expansive topic. It's an incredibly challenging topic to cover, and there's a lot of information. And I don't know, we'll get into why it's going to be such a long video here in just a moment, but the topic of today's video is going to be a man named Michael Glover, or Mike Glover. If you don't know who Mike Glover is, he is I think he's retired. If not just retired, he's a separated U.S. Army Special Forces veteran, has an extensive combat history, tactical history, runs Fieldcraft, I think it's called Fieldcraft Survival, where he teaches people survival techniques, escape and evasion stuff. He also teaches tactical information to police officers, SWAT teams, that kind of stuff. He's heavily affiliated with the Black Rifle Coffee Company and the guys that do all that stuff. He has a little over 500,000 subscribers on YouTube and almost 500,000 followers on Instagram. The reason we're talking about Mike Glover today is because something that happened a couple of months ago. And the thing that happened to Mike Glover a couple of months ago is he was actually arrested on multiple felony charges. So I can't really blow this up any bigger. Related to a domestic violence incident at his home. There have been a lot of people that have made videos about this topic, and I have not been one of them until today. The reason I'm making this video today is because recently Mike Glover went on the Cleared Hot podcast with Andy Stumpf. He and Andy are good friends, as far as I can tell. They do a lot of things together. They do training together, whatever. Andy Stumpf is a good guy. He's a guy that I've been following for a long time. He is a retired Navy SEAL, a former member of Green Team, from what I understand, SEAL Team 6. He's a smart, intelligent guy that likes to think before he speaks. I appreciate Andy Stumpf for everything that he does and his contributions to the online world that we kind of spend time in. With Mike Glover being a friend of his, he allowed Mike Glover to come on his show. He probably not just allowed, but encouraged him to come on the show to tell his side of the story so that Mike Glover could, for all intents and purposes, clear his name, clear the air, let everybody know exactly what was going on, because the criminal charges that were back on this page here have all been dismissed. All of those charges were dismissed in court, and he was not found not guilty. The charges were simply dismissed. So he wanted to come on the podcast, tell his side of the story, tell everybody exactly why the charges were dismissed, and kind of profuse his innocence. The reason I'm making a video about this today is because I think that Mike Glover made a very misguided attempt in this podcast interview at clearing himself and actually proving his innocence. I am not a person that's a Mike Glover hater or a Mike Glover fan. I appreciate him for what he is with a Special Forces background that he has. I believe he has done a lot of incredible, badass things for this country, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for him as far as that goes. When it comes to his content and the things he said on social media, there's been some things over the years that he said that I've disagreed with or taken issue with, but I have chosen, rather than be angry at him or hate him, I just don't follow him. There's things that he said that I think he's just misinformed, maybe doesn't understand exactly what he's talking about, and I thought it was unfortunate that he used his platform to say those things, but it wasn't something that at the end of the day it was going to make me hate this guy or think that he was a horrible person or some kind of idiot. I just think that he was making misguided statements that are very common kinds of statements made by veterans that have no law enforcement experience. And that's how I would categorize Mike Glover. When it comes to this particular podcast and him profusing his innocence, I think that it was a terrible mistake for him to come out and do this. And there's a couple of things that he's going to demonstrate in this 1.5 hour podcast appearance that he was on. And I'm going to tell you now that I'm not going to play the entire 1.5 hour podcast. I have separated out a bunch of clips. I have those here, and the clips I have separated out are a little bit less than 20 minutes in duration, 19 minutes of clips that I'm going to play for you. And what I'm going to do, I have them color coded, is after each clip, I'm actually going to go ahead and, so after these two red ones, I'm going to come in and give my my explanation of what he just said, or a reaction to what he said. Then I'm going to play the green one, then the next one. And that's how we're going to go through this video. But there were a couple major points that I want to point out about this, just so I don't forget, in case I forget at the end. The first point is that this was a foolish thing to do, because he'll talk about it a little bit in the video, but he still has his wife still has a stay away order. He's not allowed to talk to her, not allowed to contact her. It appears that they're splitting up. Potentially a divorce is happening there. And all of the stuff that he said in this interview and that he's saying publicly will be used in his divorce hearings and in the civil hearings. And he stands to potentially lose a significant amount of money. I don't know if he makes a ton of money, but a significant percentage of his money is going to be lost, in my opinion, due to the statements that he's making in this video. So it's very foolish to come out and say that. The other thing that he's doing is he is demonstrating the fact that he doesn't understand how the legal system works. He doesn't understand how police officers investigate crimes and how the judicial system handles crimes once someone is charged and that process continues. He is very confused about the concept of probable cause versus guilt beyond reasonable doubt. He doesn't understand that a police officer arrests somebody based on probable cause. A police officer does not arrest someone based upon proof. We look at a situation and we say, hey, is it more likely that this occurred or this didn't occur? If it's more likely that this occurred, we go ahead and write the charges and submit that to the court. The person goes to jail. Court process will then play out. If it goes to trial and the prosecutor was unable to prove beyond reasonable doubt, then the charges are dismissed. If the prosecutor chooses not to take the case to court because the key witness might back out of a case, the prosecutor might go ahead and dismiss those charges. Being found not guilty or having a case dismissed does not mean that the police officers did an improper investigation or did a bad job of investigating. That's one of the major things that he gets wrong when he's going about this. Another thing that he does is, I guess another reason why I would believe this was a very ill-advised thing for him to do is because the way he talks about these events is exactly the way a serial perpetrator of domestic abuse would describe these events. He's shirking responsibility. He's getting all hung up on definitions of things, trying to get, all dialed in to whether or not when he put his hands on her, how hard he had his hands on her, when he forced open a door, whether he kicked the door open or whether he used his shoulder, saying there was no damage when clearly there was damage. And we're going to go over that. It's being very, very petty about some of the minor details that are really just distractions from the overall. And he's not doing anything to prove his innocence. I think that the most appropriate thing for him to do once these charges were dismissed would be to come out publicly and say, listen, my wife and I had an incident at the house where we had a disagreement. Things got out of hand. She went to the hospital. There was a lot of misunderstandings about what happened between her and I. And due to that, I was placed under arrest. The court process has played out. All of the charges have been dismissed. And I would like to put this incident, my wife and I would like to put this incident behind us. If he came out and said something like that, I would respect him and I would probably believe him. Unfortunately, the way he did it in this format, he's going to say a lot of things that are going to cause me not to believe what he's saying. And it puts more questions in my head than it does answers. This is a situation where, we say this in police work all the time, and I know that people say it all the time too. There's three sides to every story. When it comes to domestic violence, there's often her side, and then there's his side, and then somewhere in the middle, that's where the truth is. So the affidavit that we have right here, this is her side of the story. This is what the police officers used to base their decision on whether or not to charge Michael Glover with a crime. What you're about to see today is Michael Glover's side of the story, and you're going to hear my reaction to his side of the story. What really happened is going to be somewhere in the middle. I think that's all I want to say as far as introducing this. I know I've already gone on for 10 minutes, but like I said, this is going to be a very long video. It's going to be a very thorough video. We're going to do this kind of informal podcast style. That's kind of what I want to call this. So I guess without further ado, I'm going to go into my editing software here. I'm going to play the first clip. I'll go ahead and clean it all up in the editing software whatever. Without further ado, let's play the first clip and I'll come back and give you my explanation of what it is I think he's saying.
I, right now, have had all charges criminally dismissed. And for people, just as a caveat to the conversation, an antidote to the conversation, there's a lot of misunderstanding and disinformation when it comes to what this is. At no point did my spouse drop charges. You don't have the ability to do that. In fact, in most states and most domestic violence cases,
once it's initiated, the train is out of the station.
In the state of Utah, for example, like many states, if a law enforcement officer shows up to a domestic violence call, somebody's going to jail. Now, it could be going to jail, booking you, and then nothing happens. It could be a disorderly conduct charge. It could be DV, domestic violence, but somebody's going to jail. So, with that being said, at no point were my charges dropped because of great lawyers, my spouse saying it didn't happen. I think it was a combination of three primary things. One, physical evidence, a lot of physical evidence. Two, testimony from all parties. And three, and most significantly, likely, I say likely because I'm trying to be loose with the terminology, but when I say likely, I most definitely mean most likely misconduct by the police department, including civil rights violations. Now,
Alrighty, so he starts right off, and I've got some notes over here that I prepared so I don't forget everything. So I might be a little distracted on this side of the screen. I apologize. I just want to make sure that I address everything that he's saying. He starts right off by saying that, there's a lot of misinformation, incorrect facts about my case out there. So he wants to spend today putting out the correct information about these facts. And the first thing that he says is that there's misinformation saying that the charges were dropped because she wanted to drop the charges. He said that's not what happens. That's not how the system works. The first thing I want to say to that, and they're going to, Andy actually is going to kind of correct him on this later on in the video, but that's actually completely inaccurate, Michael. DV charges are often dismissed, and actually more often than not, when DV charges are filed, they're actually dismissed because the victim, in this case your wife, either changes their story, recants her story, or simply refuses to cooperate with the prosecutor. So the first thing that you said is wrong. You're actually giving out misinformation about your own case. What you're saying there, I think most intelligent people already know that not to be true. So I'm going to say that you're actually lying in that case. The next thing that he said was that in most states, and Utah is one of those states, everybody knows that when a police officer is dispatched to a domestic violence call, somebody is going to jail. Either they're charged with domestic violence or they're charged with disorderly conduct. They're locked up overnight, and later on the charges are dismissed. That's what he said. That is completely 100% inaccurate. That is not true. That is not reality. You're demonstrating that you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about by making that statement. As a police officer, I've been a police officer for 13 years. I've worked in a very high crime area. I respond on average to about 10 to 15 calls for service per day. Of those 10 to 15 calls per service, I would say it's not uncommon for me to respond to 5 domestic violence calls a day. What makes a call domestic violence? Somebody will call in, a woman will call in and say, or no, neighbors will call in and say, the people next door are fighting. It's a married couple next door, they're fighting. That's a domestic violence call. A woman calls in and says, my husband put his hands on me. That becomes a domestic violence call. There's thousands of reasons of why calls are classified as domestic violence. I, as a patrol officer, respond to this call for service, talk to both parties, and I am the one that determines whether or not that call for service is actually a domestic violence incident. And then I have to decide what to do with it. 99.9% of the time, when I respond to a call that is classified as domestic violence, I make the determination that it was not actually domestic violence. So nobody goes to jail. If I arrive on a call that was domestic violence, I determine, first of all, it was domestic violence. And second, I can determine the primary physical aggressor of that call. And I have probable cause to believe, to support that thought. That's when I'm going to make an arrest. What he's saying, the correct way to say what he thought he was saying is, it's a law in Utah, as well as most states across the country, that if an officer arrives on a scene and develops probable cause that the domestic violence occurred and they know who the primary physical aggressor is, the police are required to make an arrest in that situation. That's very different than simply responding to a domestic violence call and saying, well, it's a DV call, so somebody is going to jail today. You have to understand the difference. Mike, unfortunately, does not understand the difference. He also then goes on to say, he's going to prove that that he's innocent, and the reason these charges were dismissed is because of it was based on testimony, it was based on the evidence, and police misconduct and the violation of his civil rights. So he's setting up that he's going to point out instances of police misconduct and that his civil rights were violated in this video. Let's go to the next clip.
She comes downstairs and she's nude, standing on the landing, which is like we have a 2-story home with a basement, and she's on the landing of the stairs. So one tier of steps down, and there's another tier of steps. She's on the landing of that, looking out over the kitchen. And so I'm 20 feet from her, pretty far away. And we're getting a spat, and we say some things to each other, and I'm telling her to get away because I want to create space. And so that doesn't work out, and all of a sudden she turns and she heads upstairs, but she does so, and she says something kind of vile. She doesn't remember what she said. I don't remember exactly what she said, but it didn't sound good to me. And when she did so, when she ran upstairs, it occurred to me that she was not dressed. And like, I'm like, she's naked. Like, and my brain's trying to register all this. She runs upstairs, she goes into the bedroom, and she slams the bedroom door and locks it. And as she's running upstairs, I see my son in her arms. And I'm thinking, okay, this isn't good. It's not bad, but it could be bad. And my brain goes into, hey, this might be something that you need to investigate and make sure it's okay. So I run upstairs, and as I run upstairs, I hit a locked door.
All right, so this is the part of video where he starts to chronologically go through the events that occurred on the day that he was arrested and charged with domestic violence. He talked a little bit about some arguing and some bickering and stuff that had gone before, but just in the interest of time, we're not going to show all that. This is what I believe is the guts of what really went on. So he said he's downstairs cooking breakfast for the kids. He's got the Eggos going, the scrambled eggs going, and his wife comes down the stairs completely naked, holding their, I think it was 8-month-old baby. I already forget what the exchange of, I guess she said something vile, and went running up the stairs. So she is completely naked, holding a baby, runs upstairs and locks the door. He runs after her and finds the door locked. So this part of the story, I'm still kind of on board with. Okay, I understand, you might have said some things wrong before, but here we are. This is a concerning situation. I think that any person under those circumstances would be concerned about what's going on. People generally don't walk around the house completely naked when there's other children around. She runs upstairs, locks herself in the room with the baby after an argument. There's not necessarily an indication that she's going to hurt the baby or that there's anything wrong there. But as a concerned father, I would 100% go up the stairs after her and try to talk to her, try to speak to her, try to figure out what's going on. That's what he describes as the first part of this incident. Now let's see what happened next.
The door. Guys, I am a breacher. I'm a qualified, trained breacher who's trained it for a living and done it for a living. I'm trained as a breacher in both special operations and all breaching tactics in CQB, trained, and also heavy breaching. And I'm also a breacher in the CIA. I was a train, and they take it very seriously as a breacher in that because it's more liability. I was a heavy breacher in the CIA and went to all the training, including instructor training, all the elements that make you a breacher for that training. The best training I've been to in the world. I have breached thousands of doors, ballistic, explosive, mechanical, every single problem I've seen. And I know doors. I hit that, I make contact with the door. And as soon as I hit the knob, I can make contact with the knob. I go to turn the knob and it's locked. I apply pressure with my 200 plus pound body and I pop in, and there's an interior facing door that's hollow core. There's like a strip of wood right behind the lock.
Probably an interior hollow core door.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if I call that a breaching problem.
It's not a breaching problem at all. For me and you who understands that, it's not a breaching problem. I push it in.
Alrighty, so this is the part of video where I start to question, why is he putting out this kind of information? When somebody starts to describe that they ran up to a room and they found the door locked and how they entered that room, and then they go into this long explanation about how they're a breacher and they're one of the best breachers in the world and they have all the most amazing breacher training, and whether or not this door would be difficult to open, this, that, and the other thing, that's when my spidey sense as a police officer starts to say, there's some bullshit coming here. And that's exactly what he does. He says that he put his 200-pound body into that door and he pushed it open. He found a locked door and he initially said, when I hit the door, and then he corrected himself, because what he did is he ran up and he probably put his shoulder in that door and pushed it open. And later on in the video, we're actually going to hear him admit that he split the door frame when he pushed the door open. In order to push a door open like that, it takes a significant amount of force. If you're the person that's on the other side of that door, if you're a woman who is having a loud argument with your husband and you decide to run up in your bedroom and lock the door, and then your husband comes and forces that door open with enough force that it splits the door frame and part of the door frame actually falls on the floor, you're going to be terrified by this particular event. What he's doing by describing it this way is try to minimize his actions, trying to say that he really didn't do anything. He just went up and opened the door. As a police officer, when I hear people talking like this, this makes me believe that they actually did a lot more than what they're leading on to, and that there's probably a fair amount of guilt in there somewhere. Now, forcing open a door in your own home is not necessarily, it's not a crime in the state of Ohio. Apparently it is a crime in the state of Utah. So he's already admitted guilt to at least one of the things that he was charged with. But regardless, let's move on to his next point.
As soon as I push it in, I see my spouse with my son, and they're in the bathroom because there's the bedroom, and then there's a bathroom door, and there's her. I go straight to her. I beeline towards her. I grab my son. She pulls on my son back. I decide it's not a good idea to try to navigate this over my son with physical contact, with her pulling on my son and me pulling on my son, saying, I want this and you want this. In hindsight, she wanted to protect our son. And in hindsight, I wanted to protect my son. Went to grab him out of her hands to make sure there was nothing going on, nothing crazy, because I don't like emotional people managing toddlers. And look, she didn't mean to do anything. That was likely a miscommunication on both of our parts, but I wasn't taking the risk. Mm-hmm. And for anybody listening to this, I would ask, what would you do in that same situation if you thought literally at that moment the worst case scenario? You wouldn't go in, if you thought it was worst case scenario, you would go in there, and if mismanaging it, you would do something very violent in order to protect your son. It wasn't appropriate for me to engage with any level of violence. I had to tactically move towards her, grab my son under his arms, and remove him from that situation. That's what I did. I am not angry. I'm not upset. As soon as I handed over the kid, I was upset at the fact that she allowed that to happen or put our son in that position, despite her not recognizing that, admittingly not recognizing it. And I had a conversation with her and I told her I'm done. I said, I'm not doing this with you. And I meant I'm done. I'm not done with us. I'm done with this situation. I told her to get dressed and she needed to leave and leave my son.
All right, so this is a pretty interesting part of the video, and what we're going to do is we're going to compare his statement to her statement that's on the affidavit, and we're going to look at her story, his story, and that the truth is somewhere in the middle, and determine whether or not we are buying the shit that he's spewing right now. Because I can tell you 100%, I don't believe what he's saying right now. The way he's telling the story, this genuinely appears to me to be a lie. I don't believe he's being truthful. He's sugarcoating the truth and trying to hide the truth in the way he's telling the story. So his wife's holding the baby. She's completely naked. She runs up into the bedroom, locks the door. He forces the door open, splits the door frame from the hinge, or splits the door frame on the doorknob side. That part of the door frame falls on the floor, and he'll talk about that later on in the video. He then goes up to his wife and grabs the baby. They have a little bit of tug of war back and forth with the baby. He realizes, you know what, this isn't a good idea. I need to find a way to tactically remove the baby from her arms. Those were his words. And then he said, once he got the baby away from her, he said, "You're done." And I don't remember if I included that part in the clip, but he said something to the effect of, "You get out of here. I'm going to stay here with my son." That was what he said in the interview. Now, I've got the affidavit pulled up right here, and we're just going to go to the second paragraph, because the first paragraph in the affidavit just says that, they had an argument and whatever. So Jessica stated that she went into the master bedroom of the home, entering the bathroom. She then locked the door behind her. Jessica stated that she heard Michael coming up the stairs. Jessica stated that this is when Michael broke down the door. Jessica stated that Michael then advanced toward her, grabbed her wrist while she was still holding the baby. Jessica stated that Michael said, "I'll break your fucking wrist," before twisting her wrist. Jessica stated this caused her pain and she believed the wrist was broken. She then attempted to leave the bathroom. He got in her way. That's what caused the unlawful restraint charges and all that other stuff. So tell me, which one of these scenarios, knowing reality and how couples fight, argue, and all that other stuff, which of these stories is most likely true? Do you think she ran up into the bedroom, locked the door, he came up, gently pushed the door open, came in and used some kind of ninja technique without actually physically touching her or her wrist, removed that baby from her, and calmly walked away? Or do you think that he ran upstairs, pounded that door with his shoulder, split the door frame, sending splinters of wood across the room, ran up to her, grabbed her wrist, and said, "You're going to let go of this child or I'm going to fucking break your wrist," and then took the child away from her? Which of those two stories is more believable based on reality? I know which story I believe. Let's see what he said next.
At some point, she leaves the house because I take a shower, I come back downstairs, she's gone. The Jeep is gone. I don't think anything of it. In fact, I looked at my phone because we track each other's location, and I'm like, where's she at? She's at the hospital. And I went, okay, she's taking Leland to the hospital. She literally said she thought she should take Leland to the hospital. I didn't think about it for a second.
All right, now the bullshit is really starting to get deep. And he's going to demonstrate the fact that he's lying further and further on as they go throughout this conversation. As far as real time during this podcast interview, this clip was only 18 seconds after the previous clip. So in the previous clip, his wife was naked, out of her mind, locked herself in the room with the baby. He feared for the baby's safety, so he had to go up and tactically remove the baby from her arms without touching her. Then 18 seconds later, he's saying, I got out of the shower. I noticed the Jeep was gone. She was gone. The baby was gone. I looked at my phone. I tracked her because that's a completely normal thing for somebody to do. Not the type of thing that someone who's a serial domestic abuser that has trust issues and all these other things and is incredibly controlling. That's not something a controlling person would do. Track their spouse, say where they are. But regardless, he's like, oh, it looks like she's going to the hospital. She said she wanted to take the baby to the hospital earlier. I didn't even think anything of it. So literally 18 seconds ago, you're telling us that you had to force open a door because your wife was mentally unstable and was going to harm your baby. Now you're saying that she's driving a vehicle with the baby in the vehicle and you're not concerned whatsoever. You're lying. What you're saying right now is a lie. You just contradicted yourself. I don't trust you and I don't believe you. This is the kind of stuff that it's unfortunate for his own case that he came out and made these comments. It's not possible. I've been around enough of these things to know when someone's lying. Mike Glover is 100% lying in this situation. He wasn't just, oh, she's taking the baby to the hospital. I didn't think anything of it. We know this is not true. Let's see what he said next.
And then I got into the Sprinter van and started driving. Long story short, in that segment, I found out Provo Police Department was looking for me. I heard them on dispatch because I was like, Provo Police Department is looking for me. I have a dispatch app or a police scanner app. The second I put the police scanner app on, I literally hear nearly verbatim. Yeah, this is his address. This is the address, which is my address. Be advised, he's an armed and dangerous veteran who's known to carry, need backup. That's the call that came, okay? And I have a Ring camera installed in my house, so I saw who showed up with guns in a very elevated posture.
Were they out of the holster?
Yes.
All right, so now we're at the part of the video where we have a domestic violence suspect who's going to start playing the victim card. This is something that domestic violence suspects do all the time. It's a very common tactic. This is a guy who a couple seconds ago saw his wife was in the car on the way to the hospital with the baby, thought nothing of it. I had to edit out part of the video just because he meandered on for like 25 minutes. But he ended up calling some friends and they showed up in one of their company vans. He got in the van and was driving. While he was driving, even though he was not concerned about anything and nothing had occurred at his home, he opens up his phone and starts listening to the police scanner. Is this something that people do when they're just out driving around? No, it's not. This is something that people do when they have a guilty conscience because they think that police are about to be involved in their life and they want to know. This is Mike Glover knowing damn well what he's already done. And he knows that the police are going to be called and he's trying to gain intelligence on this. He thinks he's going to outsmart the system and outsmart everybody by coming out and saying these things. Do a lot of people have scanner apps on their phone? Yes. I used to. I don't have one anymore. Do I call my friends to bring me a car so I can get in the car and start driving and then pull up that scanner app on just a normal on a normal daily occurrence with nothing unusual happening? No, absolutely not. Is it possible that he thought his wife had lost her mind and she was taking the baby to the hospital and was going to make up some kind of crazy allegation about him because of the confrontation that they had? Sure. But why didn't you say that? The reason you didn't say that is because you're trying to craft a lie. And anyone that has any kind of experience dealing with this stuff understands that what you're currently saying is not true. You're lying about what was going on. But regardless, let's see the next thing he has to say.
And very well respected lawyer. I call him, I was like, here's what I just found out. I don't know what's going on. What's your advice? And I'm thinking advice. I'm not saying, can you represent me? I'm like, what's your advice? Like, what do I do here?
Yeah.
And he goes, when they get to the point where they start talking about the details of the case, of what took place in the house, in the home, you need to tell them that you want your lawyer. Okay.
All right, so we've established that the police are looking for him, that they're at his house. They've listed him as a potentially armed and dangerous subject, which is safe to assume given him and his background and his social media accounts and the way he presents himself. I think it's safe to assume that he is an armed person. He's certainly a dangerous person. Whether or not he's dangerous towards law enforcement is unknown, But this is a domestic violence type case, so they're showing up his house with guns drawn. This is a completely understandable response. Him not knowing what to do, he does a smart thing and he calls an attorney. An attorney says, you can give the officers your information, tell them maybe where you're coming from, maybe where you're going, but once they start to ask for details about the incident, you need to tell them that you want to speak to a lawyer. This is perfectly appropriate advice. This is good advice from a lawyer. I don't have a problem with this. This is the right thing to do if you're suspected of committing a crime.
We go in, they sit me in a room, and they question me.
Did you tell them you were coming?
Yeah, we told them that we were coming. So that officer went from the hospital to the station to question me. So my spouse was not at the hospital for my son. She had my son. Nor was she at the hospital for anything related to his bacterial infection or her sickness, because she was sick as well. Getting into the interview room, and we go through all the questioning, and we get to the point where we talk details. And I said to the officer, and I looked at Greg. I mean, this is on body cameras, by the way. This is like proofed information. There's evidence of this. I hope they didn't destroy this. I looked at Greg and I said, is this where and he's like, yeah. I said, I'd like to speak. I'd like to have my attorney present. Something like that. Whatever the verbiage is for that. Okay, so you're refusing to answer the questions. Like, no, I'm not refusing. I'm like, I want my attorney present. Like, this is what you do, right? You ask for your attorney when you want to have your attorney present during this interview. He said, okay, go ahead and stand up. And he stands me up. He searches me, he pats me down, and he puts handcuffs on me. He puts me in his patrol car immediately. And he sends me to the Utah County Jail and books me on 30 plus years of felony and misdemeanor charges. 4 felonies to include aggravated assault with serious bodily injury, which is a class 2 felony. It's nearly the equivalent in totality. It is in sentencing of manslaughter. And there's no difference between me and a person who shows up at their house, beats their wife into coma with a baseball bat, and kidnaps her. And then does that in front of his children, because I caught 3 additional felonies, class 3 felonies of child abuse, essentially, with a charge of unlawful detention and breaking my own door, which is actually a charge.
All right, so there's a lot in that little clip there, and I'll try to remember all of the points that he covered. So, remember, he talked to an attorney. His attorney said, once they get to the point where you're talking about the incident, tell them that you're not going to answer any more questions without your lawyer present. We all know the Miranda warning. That is what the Miranda warning is. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. You have the right to have a lawyer with you during questioning. If you cannot pay a lawyer will be provided to you prior to questioning if you so desire. If you wish to answer questions now without a lawyer present, you have the right to stop answering questions at any time until you've spoken to a lawyer. Do you understand your rights? That's pretty much the Miranda warning. I probably missed a couple words in there, but what that means is, yeah, you have a right to have a lawyer with you while we ask you any questions. If you say, I want my lawyer right now, we will stop asking you questions. That's what the Miranda warning says. It doesn't mean we're just going to put this on pause. We're going to call your attorney. He's going to get on a plane and fly to wherever we are. We're not going to sit in that interview for 72 hours waiting on your attorney to show up. It means we're going to stop asking you questions right now. It also means that if I already have developed probable cause to believe that you're the primary physical aggressor in a domestic violence incident, I can go ahead and place you under arrest. I don't need a statement from you in order to place you under arrest. There's a potential that, the female half went to the hospital, complained of a broken wrist, whatever, and you go out and you talk to the suspect, and the suspect is like, hey, man, listen, she was running around the house naked. She went up into the bathroom. I heard screaming. I went up there. I find her on the ground with the baby on the ground. She had slipped and probably hit her wrist on the bathtub. I don't know, something like that. And you can go upstairs and show that there was soap on the floor and that there's reason to believe that your story is true. there's a chance that in that situation, the officer is going to be like, hey, you know what? You're right. I'm just going to document this and send it on. But without any kind of statement from the suspect, if I've already developed my probable cause, I'm required by law at that point in time to place you under arrest. Place you under arrest, charge you, take you to jail. That's how that stuff works. This stuff where you can't arrest me until I've spoken to my lawyer, that's not true. You can talk to your lawyer later. I'll take you to jail. You can call your lawyer from jail. That's how that works. It's not a violation of your rights to prevent you from talking to your lawyer. A lot of people that don't know what they're talking about get really confused about that. I think we're gonna cover some of that here in a little bit when he starts talking about x-rays and things like that. But you have to remember, there was an incident that happened in the house earlier that morning. His wife got into a car with their child, went to the hospital, and she got to the hospital and said, hey, my husband twisted my wrist and I think it's broken. She ended up going and getting x-rays, and a radiologist looked at the x-ray and said, you know, I think we have a potential fractured wrist there. The officer says, does that mean you think we have a broken wrist? And the radiologist says yes. So you have a woman who says, my husband was twisting my wrist, saying I will fucking break your wrist. I am now under a tremendous amount of pain. I go to the hospital and I have a radiologist that's saying, yeah, it looks like it's a potential broken wrist. The officer then goes back to the house, goes up into the bedroom, and finds a door frame on the floor. What he's doing is he's finding evidence that corroborates her story. You then go to interview the suspect. The suspect refuses to interview. And you say, you know what? I've already got the probable cause. It's my responsibility at this point in time to place you under arrest. And that's exactly what happened. Let's see what he said next.
A corrections officer, when I got bailed, pulls me off to the side and he says, I need to tell you something, man. I'm like, ooh, yes? He's like, Provo PD is targeting you. And I said, why do you say that? Why is Provo Police Department targeting me? He said, I've been doing this job for a decade. I know everything about this system, and I've never seen police officers come in to listen to conversations on phone calls made in jail over a DV-related case. I've asked a lot of people since then because I don't know how it works, and supposedly that's true. Like Matt Van Diver, who's a SWAT guy who works for me and is the head of training for Fieldcraft in Colorado, never sees it. You see it during a murder case because that's relevant, but they listen to my conversation. Not only did they listen to my conversation, and not only did they book me on 30 years of charges. Those are the total of, it's actually 30 plus years, 30 years of felony and misdemeanor charges, but they gave me another felony. They just gave me, lackadaisically, another 5-year felony, class 3 felony, for witness tampering. You know the reason they said I was witness tampering? They said, because they wrote out the quotes of what I said to Greg Lappin, who I was talking to, because I'm like in crisis mode. I said, I need you to check on Jess and I need you to check on my son. I need you to let Jess know like the severity of the situation, and I need you to take care of my family for me. That's basically what I said in a nutshell. That was witness tampering. Well,
Alrighty, so I skipped over a bunch of stuff that happened when he was in jail, talking about how crappy jail is and all that other kind of stuff. And some of the stuff that has to do with solitary confinement and mistaken identity, that's outside of my realm of expertise, okay? So we're going to stick to what the police did and my explanation of what the police did. Now, he said that he had a corrections officer come to him and say, listen, you need to be careful. The Provost police are targeting you. I've never seen them come and listen to jail calls on a simple domestic violence case before. Well, here's the thing. This is not a simple domestic violence case. This is a case of unlawful restraint, felonious assault, and multiple counts of endangering children on a felony level. This is not just a simple domestic violence case. The other thing you have to consider is, what is the alleged victim telling the police about this case? That's something that he has no idea what is actually going on. And that information might not ever become public for reasons. There's reasons why that stuff should probably be kept confidential, right? If you have statements made by the victim to the police that would affect how the police would handle that case. Things like, if just hypothetically, let's say a woman is battered by a guy who has 1 million followers collectively on social media. And those followers are extremely loyal, rabid fans to him that will do almost anything in order to support him. Let's say that you tell the police, hey, I'm really terrified that he's going to do something and cause his followers to come after me. I'm concerned for my life. That might be a situation where the police officer would go start listening to his jail calls. Then you're listening to a jail call and he's framing what he said a certain way. There's always his side, her side, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. I guarantee the conversation did not go the way he's saying it went. He called his friend up and he says, hey, I need you to get with Jess. I need you to make sure that she understands how big of a deal this is. You need to get with her and you need to take care of her. That's probably more along the lines of what he said rather than his, light and fluffy rainbows and sprinkles version of what he said on that recorded call. If you're a police officer and you're listening to that and you've got a woman who was battered, you believe she has a broken wrist, you believe that this guy is some kind of sociopath that has a huge social media following and that he cares more about his social media following than he does about his wife and children. If you are a police officer that is under that belief because of the things that you've seen in this case so far, you would probably interpret that call as witness tampering. And you're going to go ahead and hit him with that charge. You also have to remember he's already arrested. He's already arrested and charged. He's going to go to trial regardless. Adding more charges doesn't change the fact that he's still going to go to trial and that the state still has to prove their case. Let's go on to the next one.
No contact order, except my spouse, unbeknownst to me, because I'm inside jail, on day 2, recants her entire statement. She made a statement that I went in there and broke her wrist. That statement was recanted by her on day 2. She came in and said, I lied. After the fact, and I don't know all the details and all the intricacies of her mind at the time, but generally speaking, what I understand is she said that she blacked out, she had a postpartum event, she was upset, and she said a statement that lasted a couple minutes. And 48 hours later, she recanted the statement to the law enforcement officer. You know what didn't happen? The law enforcement officer didn't file a supplemental in the actual case. He didn't file a supplemental lining out the details of that. It was in the police report, but it was like a blurb, it was a sentence.
All right, and this is a part that Andy is actually going to chime in just a minute and kind of correct Michael on some of these facts here, on his belief about that, but I'm going to address it nonetheless. He thinks that since 2 days after he was arrested, Jess went back to the police and said, hey, I'm sorry. I made the whole thing up. I don't want to cooperate. I don't want him arrested. I want him out of jail. He thinks that proves that he's innocent when nothing could be further from reality. We all know, anybody who knows anything about domestic violence knows that this is an incredibly common occurrence. I have arrived on scene. I've responded to calls for service from a woman who said that she got beat up by her husband. I arrived on scene and I see injuries on her face, marks on her face, obvious evidence that occurred. And then I've had her yell at me, yeah, he punched me in the face, blah, blah, blah. And I go over and talk to him. He either gives a statement or refuses to give a statement. I place him under arrest. And as I'm taking him out to the car, she's screaming at me and yelling at me for arresting him because she doesn't know how she's going to pay her rent this month because he's going to lose his job. I can understand Michael's wife wanting to recant her story. This is a very common thing to do. And when he made that call and said, make sure she understands how serious this is, his buddy Greg might have actually gone to her and said, Jess, you're ruining Mike's life. His whole career is going down the drain because of this. You need to let up. Mike is the one that makes all of the money for the family. How are you guys going to survive? She probably thought about that and said, you know what? You're right. I don't know how I'm going to survive. I don't know how I can keep up the lifestyle that I have if Mike loses everything due to a felony domestic violence conviction. A felony domestic violence conviction for someone like Mike is absolutely a big deal because he does weapons training, tactical weapons training for police officers, and he puts on civilian training courses that involve weapons. He would be barred federally from owning a firearm if this domestic violence case were to go through. She would be completely ruining his life. And I'm sure that she was aware of that when she chose to go in and recant her story. That does not mean that he is innocent any way, shape, or form. And by him saying that, it's dirty, and he's demonstrating the fact that he doesn't know the first thing about what he's talking about. And he's going to look really stupid in a second here when Andy kind of confronts him on that.
So I think one of the biggest things, and this is in talking to some law enforcement friends.
Is this when this was going down?
Well, it was about Jess recanting her statement. Unfortunately, that is incredibly common.
Really?
Yes.
See, I would have thought if you asked me that it would be uncommon.
The number of people who are victims of domestic violence that were, and I know that, and I'm talking about from the law enforcement officers that I've talked to where I live in the Valley, the repeat offenders. And they get there, and there are obvious signs of physical violence. And they, I believe, I'm a little bit out in front of my skis on this. I believe in Montana, if there are signs of physical violence, the police are obligated to do something about it. But they will have the person who has been beaten argue until they're blue in the face. No, I don't want to press charges. This was my fault. Nothing happened. And then if it is a mandatory action taken, they will go in the following day and try to unwind it and still stay with the person. So it has nothing to do with your situation, but I think, unfortunately, and law enforcement officers obviously respond to DV calls far more than anybody would like to think about, but it's, from what I've heard in talking to them, incredibly common. And that may be why they didn't give it the levity that they should have given it, which sucks for your situation, and I think it's just more an indication of how fucking often they have to deal with it.
Yeah.
So that was also kind of a major indicator to me that he's full of shit. Is criminals will often pretend that they don't know something that is very obvious when you confront them with the facts. Andy confronted him with the facts right there, that women very commonly, very regularly will recant their story, change their story, want to drop charges for all of the reasons why they do. And this is also a reason why in most states, Ohio is one of those states, I'm assuming Utah is one of those as well, that the state can actually pick up the charges if the victim refuses to cooperate. This is also why if I show up on a call for service, let's say the neighbors call in. The neighbors say, I just watched John punch Jill in the face. I'm worried for her safety. I show up on scene. I go to the door. Jill has blood pouring out of her nose. And I asked Jill what happened. She says, nothing happened. Why? and I'm like, well, because you're bleeding. She's like, no, I'm not. I'll go to the male half and I'll ask him what happened. He'll say nothing happened. I'll go back to the neighbors and I'm like, you watched him punch her in the face. And the neighbor's like, yeah, if I got that on body camera, I'll attempt to get a written statement from them. If I have all of that evidence, I'll go and I'll put John under arrest, because I, as the state, have the opportunity to make that arrest without the cooperation of the victim in order to protect the victim. Because it's also true that there's many examples of this where police officers have arrived, found evidence that domestic violence occurred, the victim refused to cooperate, the officers left, and then that victim turned up dead later. That is the reason why police officers have the authority to make an arrest without the cooperation of a victim on domestic violence cases. This is common knowledge. It's very common knowledge. The fact that he's playing dumb about that, he says, oh, I would have thought something different. No. You're lying. You're a scumbag. Let's go to the next clip.
On top of that, the idea that I broke down the door because that was used against me. In fact, the Department of Child and Family Services said verbatim, he broke down the door. If he wasn't an angry, violent person, why would he break down the door? Now, I didn't know this until analyzing it with Evan, you, and other people, and realizing civilians think differently about breaking down the door. I breach doors for a living, so I don't think anything of it when I make entry into a door. But if you say break down a door, which was written down multiple times in the affidavit, via me saying, yeah, I pushed in the door. I never said I broke down the door. I didn't break down anything because I know what that means. Breaking down the door is actually hard to do because you have to break it down off the hinges.
Yeah, when I hear that, I think a door off the hinge is probably in the center of the room.
Yeah, and how many screws? You got 3 screws per plate? And like, how many inches are those screws? 2+ inch screws through a plate? And like, okay, that's a lot of violence. I pushed in the door. It was hollow core. There's even an affidavit statement that says I kicked in the door, or kicked down the door is the actual literal writing of that. Kicking down the door. I have a size 13 foot. If I kicked a hollow core door in the middle, my foot would go through it. There's no damage to the door whatsoever. The door is completely intact on its hinges. You know how I know? The only piece of evidence they did give me after we subpoenaed them was video of the door on its hinges. My mom fixed it because she went to my house 3 days later when I was in jail, driving from South Carolina to fix it. She fixed it with a strip of wood that she picked up off the ground, put on with wood glue for $5. And she fixed it in 10 minutes. No damage because I pushed in the door. So again, creating and shaping a narrative based around a situation that was violent, serious bodily injury. Okay. Well,
All right. This is one of the parts of the video where this guy is obviously a lying piece of shit. And it kind of reverts back to the whole breaching conversation I had earlier in the video. He's like, when I think about breaking down a door, I'm thinking about breaking down a door, taking it off the hinges. The door should be on the ground, blah, 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 going all of this stuff. He goes, I didn't do that. I didn't damage the door. But then he also says, my mom was able to repair the door with just a $5 bottle of wood glue. If you didn't damage the door, you didn't break down the door, you didn't force entry into this door, why did your mom have to come in and repair the door with a single piece of wood that had fallen on the ground? I pulled this picture up just for demonstration purposes. This is not from his court case or anything. I literally pulled this up off the internet, but I have seen doors like this hundreds of times in my career. I have created doors like this hundreds of times in my career. I have been responsible for this kind of damage many, many, many times. This is what happens when you boot a door. This is what happens when you force your way into a locked room. This is called damage. And if you want to mince words about whether or not this door was broken down, whether or not this door was kicked in, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that you forced this door open. You forced open a locked door, causing damage to the door frame. This was a violent incursion. You have a door frame that is split and then a piece of wood on the floor. This is what happens when you do that. This is maybe a better door than what he had. A lot of people just have like a thin strip of wood that goes down the door frame. And when you push that door open, the nails actually just pull out of the wall and that strip of wood will fall on the floor. But I promise you that if you're a woman that's on the other side of that door and you're terrified, justifiably terrified or not justifiably terrified, and you hear a thud at that door and then you see the door frame split and fall in on you, you're going to describe that to the police as he kicked down the door or he kicked in the door. It doesn't matter whether or not he used some kind of CIA breaching technique or not. The only thing that matters is you locked yourself in the room for your own protection. He forced his way into that room, and that there is evidence showing that he forced his way into that room. And he literally just described the evidence to you, proving that he forced his way into that room. When you're trying to play semantics with, picking out particular words and phrases and trying to say that they mean something different than what they mean, you're being a lying piece of shit. That's what I'm getting. The more and more I listen to him talk, the more and more and more convinced I am that something illegal happened that day. I don't know if he committed an act of felonious assault. I don't know that he broke her wrist. He's going to put in one element of doubt here in a little bit, but I do believe that he busted down this door and that he harmed her on that particular day. And everything he's saying is causing me to believe that. That is not officer misconduct. That is not a corrupt system. That is his actions coming back to bite him. That is his inability to control himself. Not only his inability to control himself, but more likely, it is his desire to control his wife that caused this. Because that is more commonly what causes these domestic violence incidents. It's about control. It's not about two people getting drunk and beating on each other. It's about one person trying to control and manipulate the other. And so far, everything that I'm seeing for the last 90 minutes is a perfect example of someone trying to manipulate and control everyone else's thoughts about him and this other person, who, for all we know, is a completely innocent victim. Let's see what he had to say next.
The most important component to this is the victim. Because if you have somebody who's seriously bodily injured, they would be battered. Like, guys, like I would tell you straight up, if my spouse was battered, if you would likely never talk to me again if my spouse was battered.
I'd beat the fuck out of you.
You would beat me up. I also take in consideration, I don't know, what does the victim look like, right? My spouse is 105 pounds, 5'3", fair skin. She's translucent. You could almost see through her skin. She's very pale skinned. She went to the hospital and complained of a wrist injury. She made her original statement, which you guys could read in the affidavit. And then when that statement was made, she got an x-ray, 3 images. Every single one of those x-rays that were assessed by the radiologist to be suspected, and there's a term for it, for hairline fracture, suspected hairline fracture. When it gets to the PA reads it as hairline fracture. When it gets to the cop writes it as broken wrist. Well, the first impact of this was the third day when this cop from Provo PD pulled me out on day 3, and he said he's taking my phone. And I said, what is going on? He says, she's got a broken wrist. And he said it so rudely, like crudely, like just a little arrogant asshole. Like, she's got a broken wrist. Like, okay, what the fuck does that have to do with me? Because I didn't break her fucking wrist. I didn't say that. But I said I didn't do that. So she has a suspected, DCFS calls me and says, you broke her arm. Can you explain? I didn't break her fucking arm. I didn't even fucking touch her. This is like me defending myself in a circumstance where I'm going to prison for 30 fucking years from a statement of words. She's not masking anything. She's not pretending to be okay. She's saying there's nothing there. You know why there's nothing there? She said there's nothing there, and there's nothing there. No bruising on the day of. No bruising, no marks, nothing from head to toe. 0. Nothing. So how do you go from, in a DV case, like this wasn't a DV case where they said, I choked her, because you could choke a person and not leave marks on them. This is a DV case where they say, I grabbed her wrist and fucking snapped it in half while she was holding my infant son.
All right, this is another instance where he's lying and he's trying to reframe an issue and trying to say things that just are not true. And he's conflicting. He's telling conflicting stories. I'm losing the word that I'm looking for. But he starts off by saying that there's no evidence that anything occurred. You know, look at her. On the day of, there was no bruising. That particular statement right there really struck out to me, because anybody that does this, I do these investigations for a living, knows that some people don't bruise the day of. And as a matter of fact, if you're injured and you have broken bones, I've seen this with myself. You saw my pictures when I got attacked by the dogs, when I wrecked my bike, all of that stuff. The day of, I had no bruising. The next day and the days that followed, I had incredible bruising up and down my body. He describes his wife as a very tiny, fragile, frail woman. She described the incident that he came up, grabbed her wrist, and twisted her wrist. Said that he twisted her wrist like this and said, I will break your fucking wrist if you don't let go of my child. He said that he had to go into the room and tactically remove the child from her arms. She said that he grabbed my wrist and said, I will break your fucking wrist. She then went to the hospital and had x-rays done. The person who looked at the x-rays said, yeah, this looks like a possible fracture. And then when he's confronted about it, said, hey, she has a broken wrist. He goes, she can't have a broken wrist. I didn't fucking touch her. She didn't have a bruise. It's incredibly likely that you did touch her, that you were twisting her wrist around, and that something cracked in there, and it wouldn't leave a mark. It wouldn't show up that day. It wouldn't show until you took an x-ray, and bruising wouldn't appear until the next day or days later. His version of the story is not adding up. He's not causing me to believe that he is innocent. The only thing that we know is that the charges were dismissed. And the biggest reason the charges were dismissed that I'm seeing, and from his own telling of the story, the biggest reason the charges were dismissed is because the victim decided she no longer wanted to cooperate with the prosecution. It's almost impossible to get a conviction in a case where the victim refuses to cooperate with the prosecution. And that's the reason why these DV cases are dismissed so often. We're almost done. He only has a couple more idiotic statements to make. Let's see what the next one is.
She told the cops, and I found all of this is in hindsight. I haven't talked to her about any of this. She told the cops that she had fell on her Suron bike. What she did, she made a fucking YouTube video about it. She fell on her fucking bike in a parking lot on a Suron that goes 50 miles an hour, and she landed on her hands and knees. She never said ouchie because Jess doesn't do that. She doesn't go, oh man, I said, hey, are you good? She's like, yes, I'm good, right? She told them she thinks she might have got a hairline fracture from the fall because it was still sore.
Alrighty, so this is the very first time, and this is about an hour, I think it's like an hour and 20 minutes in. I don't know, it's quite a ways into him telling this story. This is the first time in the entire video that he has said anything relevant whatsoever that could be used in court to help defend him. And his argument is, listen, and this would have been my argument if I was in his case, his situation. I would have said, listen, we had a dispute. She was naked and crazy and out of her mind. She grabbed the kid, ran up to the bedroom. I was afraid that she was going to hurt the child. I had to force entry into my own bedroom, and I didn't want to play tug of war with the baby. So I grabbed her arm, I pried it off the child, and I protected my child, and I walked away from her. And then if they said, well, she has a broken wrist, how did she break her wrist? I'd say she wrecked her scooter just a couple days ago, going about 50 miles an hour. It's on video. That would be your defense. Instead, he's talking about how they're trying to say that a fracture was actually a break, and that he's trying to embellish this break into saying, now they're accusing me of snapping her fucking wrist. No, nobody accused you of snapping her wrist in half. What they're accusing you of is grabbing her and applying pressure and some twisting, possibly, that caused a hairline fracture in her wrist. If your defense is, look, she already had that broken wrist prior to our altercation, that is something that would come up in court. That would be part of your defense in court. The officer has no way of knowing what's true. All the officer knows is that he was told by the victim that her wrist hurt after he grabbed her, and that he threatened to break her wrist. And then he went to the house and found evidence that kind of matched up with that. So he wrote the charge. Nothing he's saying up until this point has refuted any of that. And literally, I mean, let's look at it. How long of a segment in his defense did he spend on that? 33 seconds. He spent 33 seconds of his defense talking about this wrist injury that she had prior to this incident. If it was really an integral part in a likely scenario that she had a prior wrist injury, or she already had a wrist injury that morning before the argument, why wouldn't she bring that up first? He doesn't talk about how close proximity this wrist injury was. It might have been months prior. Things aren't adding up. Let's listen to the last clip here.
In the end, like you've said, the system's not done yet, so it's going to work itself out. Yeah, it's going to frame itself, I think, in black and white, no pun intended, towards an X-ray on what did and didn't happen.
Yeah, you're right. So that was the part I was impatient to, but the 4th District Court, with the state prosecutor and the judge and my lawyers working through this conversation, because that's what it is. Like the state's burden is going forward with a charge that the police brought to them that they think is going to be convicted or be adjudicated in their favor. They looked at all the evidence, all the information, and said, okay, this is, we're dismissing this. Now, here's the unique thing is that doesn't typically happen. I don't know this.
Yeah.
And why doesn't it typically happen? Because you have a component of the legal system and law enforcement that are trained on laws and enforcing those laws that have very specific mandates, procedures, and SOPs to ensure they don't, in the conduct of their investigation, fuck it up, right?
All right, that's going to be the last clip that we're going to play from Mike talking to Annie, trying to describe his case. And once again, he's just completely full of shit with that statement. They were right that there's a reason we have a legal system. The legal system will help things work their way out. And in this particular case, it worked its way in Mike's favor. The officers responded to a call. They had probable cause. They filed the appropriate charges. I 100%, beyond shadow of doubt in my mind, believe that the officers filed the appropriate charge. If this had gone to trial, if the victim had cooperated with the injuries to the wrist and all that other stuff, there's also a very good chance that this would have probably been pled down to a misdemeanor count of domestic violence. Based on the information that I'm seeing, based on his own testimony, compared with the evidence of the scene and her sworn statement, I firmly believe that he forced his way into that room and that he grabbed her on the wrist and he hurt her. I don't know that he broke her wrist, but I'm confident, I can say with some confidence, that he caused physical pain. That is part of a domestic violence charge. You don't have to brutally beat somebody in order to pick up a domestic violence charge. I believe that if this process had played out and the victim had cooperated, he would have been found guilty of misdemeanor domestic violence. If he had a high enough paid lawyer, which he's got friends with enough money, they might have been able to plea that down to something that would allow him to carry weapons. I can tell you that here locally, they do criminal mischief all the time on DV cases. I don't know that would have happened out in Provo, Utah, but I do see those things happen quite frequently. The thing that's really irritating to me is that he's trying to say that his case is unique, that only because he fought so hard was he able to beat this case. He didn't beat this case. All of the evidence is there. If we were able to actually see the evidence, see the photographs, if she would take the stand, the evidence is there to convict him on this. I feel confident about that. And then he went back and tried to attack the investigation, saying, the reason that these cases are rarely dismissed, which is a bold-faced lie because they're dismissed all the freaking time. But he said that the reason why these cases usually are not dismissed is because officers are trained to do a good job. And he's insinuating that these officers did not do a good job. That's where I really start to take issue with this, because the officers did exactly the job that they're expected to do. These officers did a fantastic job. The other part where, oh shoot, I lost my train of thought. Sorry, I had to watch it for a second and remind myself what I want to say. He's talking about what the state's burden is when they're bringing cases to trial. The state's burden is not whether or not we have enough evidence to go forward with a charge. The state's burden is proof beyond reasonable doubt. And do we have enough evidence to prove this case beyond reasonable doubt? And when you have a victim that refuses to cooperate and refuses to testify, that makes your proof beyond reasonable doubt incredibly difficult to convince a jury of in cases like this. That's the reason why these charges were dropped. It has nothing to do with the validity of the charges themselves. And that's the most important part of this that I want to get through everyone's heads, because I see a lot of guilty people out there walking free thinking that there's no case against them. And that's not really true. It's just the burden that the courts put on officers as far as evidence is so high that we just choose not to take a lot of cases forward. There are murderers out there that I know 100% are guilty of murder. But due to the testimony of one witness, the prosecution doesn't believe they'll get a conviction, so they're not taking that case to trial, hoping that maybe sometime down the road that witness will choose to be honest and come forward with the right information. This situation with Mike Glover and his DV charges He never went to trial. They chose to dismiss the charge. I think that it's still within double jeopardy, or like it wouldn't violate double jeopardy to go ahead and file those charges again and use this in court against him if they wanted to. He contradicts himself quite frequently. If he was trying to prove his innocence, he did a very, very poor job while doing this interview. I think I've yammered on enough and I've said everything I need to say. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later.